Welcome to the Business Development Podcast, brought to you by the Global Business Development Association, delivering the strategies and tactics to boost your career and corporate growth.
Hello, BD Pros, and welcome to the Global Business Development Association podcast called What is Business Development? And today we have a fantastic guest, Dan Rényi. He's one of the top voices on LinkedIn when it comes to account-based marketing and marketing in general in the B2B space. He's the founder of Clear B2B. And a little bit about Dan's background. He is just, again, a fantastic expert in the field of marketing and account-based marketing. His team at Clear, they help mid-market tech consulting and engineering firms become, well, big. And in their work with clients, they usually resort to cool sounding strategies such as account-based marketing and demand generation. But more recently, their go-to-market framework, which is revenue growth mapping. And, of course, when that's implemented in the right way in the appropriate places, these approaches work like gangbusters and get you highly qualified opportunities, revenue, authority, and help you reduce body fat. Okay, maybe not the body fat part, but look, the results speak for themselves. And if you ask Dan to brag a little bit about his company's achievements, he'd probably tell you it's his client success, like the first client they had that was listed in the Financial Times 1000 list of Europe's fastest growing companies after 3 years of working with Clear. Their clients are mostly not yet big European tech companies whom they help step up on the global scene and make an impact. These companies usually have little or no marketing, and the team at Clear, they help build that brand and the go-to market motions for those clients. They end up building bigger teams, big pipelines, and get on fancy lists, and they enjoy the process the whole step of the way. Dan's proudest moments are when they get to the point where they help replace themselves for their clients. They end up helping hire the marketing team that actually replaces them, that then continues forward with all these wonderful processes that have been established by the team at Clear. It may sound weird coming from an agency guy, but look, the results are a bit different than other B2B consultancies and agencies because, well, they're neither an agency nor a consultancy. They're advisors with a strong executional arm who switch into teaching and training mode. And their clients start building out marketing and growth teams. They are growth partners who advise, execute, and teach. And Dan, welcome to the show, because we can't wait for you to teach us about this fantastic tactic that you posted about last week on LinkedIn. I saw it and I said, oh boy, I have to do a first ever episode in this podcast series that will be a BD tactical deep dive. So Dan Rényi, thank you for joining us today.
Tony, thanks a lot. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm glad I'm your first experiment lab rat here.
Yeah, you're the first lab rat, Dan. Okay.
So I feel the pressure because the first one's got to be good. And congratulations on your work and on launching this podcast. Really pro intro you had there. I've got to get one of those for my podcast as well. And yeah, I'm excited to dive into this topic because I'm passionate about it, and I was so glad that you picked up on it. It was the first time I started talking about it after a big realization, and I was like, hey, if Tony picked up on it, then I'm probably onto something, and I'm not the only one.
Yeah, well, thank you for volunteering to be the first lab rat, and let's jump into the business development lab here and start pouring some chemicals and some serious BD potions that you and the team at Clear B2B have set up and worked on. I know your posts are highly grounded in data that you've generated from the work that you've done a long time with your clients, and so That's why I always love reading your post, Dan, because it's founded in the science, it's founded in real data that's proven, and not just somebody that's just saying, well, I got 10 calls last week and 2 closed one. Well, that's nice for you, but we need bigger data sets. So let's
Yeah.
get into the lab here and let's talk about this post real quickly. Let me summarize real quickly for the folks that are listening. So this is how the post went. It says, one common ABM advice. Okay, again, for folks that are new to this, ABM is account-based marketing. We'll just use the abbreviation as we continue this discussion. So so the common advice in ABM, and here's the thing, it's wrong. Okay, when targeting scale up, it's a myth that everyone buys into. It's in all the popular books and courses. And here's what that myth is. It says target managers, not CEOs, because the managers are easier to reach and will champion your solution internally. Now, Dan, you say this advice comes straight from enterprise ABM and sales development playbooks, and it's fine for large enterprise context, meaning big accounts. Okay, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars in annual gross revenue accounts. I mean, these are the big players. Okay, that's fine. That works great when there's big buying teams that are out there. But when you're talking companies that are 200 employees, about 200 employees, maybe even a little bit less, that tactic can be, in your words, Dan, blood-suckingly wrong for companies. So we obviously want to avoid that blood-sucking situation. And so let's talk a little bit about the 200 employee, roughly 200 employee size. So that's kind of a middle market, maybe low end middle market prospect that we're talking about. And so and you talk about, Dan, the reality at smaller companies is, first, look, CEOs are directly involved in daily or weekly marketing, sales, HR, finance, ops work. I mean, they are chief cook, bottle washer still at this point. Okay. They have their hands on all the controls. They're not sitting in ivory towers like the enterprise C-suite you read about in ABM and sales book. The middle management often doesn't even have their own budget in those size companies. And, the CEOs of those, companies that are about 200, they're more accessible, way more than those enterprise executives. And then, sometimes even the middle management in these companies doesn't even exist. So here's what works instead. This is what you said. When targeting SMB, small, medium-sized businesses, aka startups and scale-ups with large annual contract revenue offers, okay, so large ACV, your best bet is to target the top of funnel awareness, content, brand, and messaging directly at the founders and CEOs. Okay. Now, people will often say, well, what about multi-threading, Dan? Well, Dan says, look, multi-threading, it still matters, but you have to flip the priorities. So, Dan, I'm just going to stop right there and let's kind of peel the layers of the onion back and hear it in your own voice about, why this methodology, what in the work that you've done with clients has this worked, and why?
Yeah. So I'll start with being hard on myself. Okay. So first, I learned this the hard way. Okay. So I learned this through client projects that could have progressed faster and we could have gotten faster results, and through our own agency's growth where I had been making this mistake for a long time. And the symptoms, I'll tell you about the symptoms, because if you're experiencing these symptoms, then it's time to take a look. Okay. So when you're talking to managers who you think are going to be your champions, and they say things like, we don't really have a budget, but if we find something that's worthwhile, we can find money for it. Okay. So that's one, it's not a red flag. It's just a cautionary flag that you may be looking at this situation where the perceived champion is not really going to be a champion, and they're not going to have as much influence as you are taught in the classical account-based sales, account-based marketing literature. Okay. Like in enterprise land. Okay. The other thing that might be apparent is, and this is a concrete situation. Okay. So I was selling to an 80-person company, and the head of marketing came inbound to us, and we started discussing things. Okay. And then it went like straight along that line. And this head of marketing was fresh, new at this company, and they came from a larger enterprise. So they had assumed that he had authority. And at just the right time, in the spirit of multi-threading, I'm like, okay, can we get on the call with the CEO? Because you're a 60 or 80% company, and it makes sense to discuss strategic things because we're about to go into a 12-month contract. Um, and so he was telling me, okay, I wanted to talk to the CEO and make sure that we're aligned with the CEO. So he comes back a day later and he's just like, oh, CEO is like, you do this. You've got this. You're the head of marketing. You make the decision. I'll just go with whatever you tell me. I was like, okay, that's interesting. Sounds good at first, but it would still be nice to talk to the CEO. And then, we're already planning stuff like when we sign and how we sign and et cetera. And he comes back after a long radio silence. And he's like, sorry, but I don't think we're going to be able to do this deal because the CEO changed his mind. Because he said, if you're going to hire 5 people, I want you to start building this out with the 5 new people and not involve an outside partner straight away. And so, of course, I'm banging my head in the wall. But I was trying to look at where I messed up. And one mistake was that I didn't multi-thread in time. And that should have been a red flag, that when the CEO doesn't want to be involved, but the head of marketing doesn't really have a budget either. Okay. So that should have been suspicious. And the fact that I wasn't able to get on a call with anybody else except for the head of marketing and just assume, well, if he loves me so much and he's got authority, then why not just go for it? It doesn't tend to work that way. And it was wishful thinking on my behalf to assume that was going to be how we would close this deal. 6-figure deal, by the way. So, yes. So that was a harsh realization when I started scratching my head. And then I started looking at the data. Okay, out of all the deals that we've got, and I'm not talking about clients right now, clients, campaigns and projects, just our agency. So from all the deals that we've closed and won, I think it's in the post, but something like 82 or 84% of them were initiated by a CEO or a founder.
Wow.
Owner of the company.
Yeah.
So it's like, whoa. And then almost all of the sales process was not handled by them usually. So if we're talking about a 60, 80, 100, 150 person company, they just tell their marketing manager or head of sales or commercial director to, hey, look at this company and talk to them and see if they're any good. Or maybe they'd even say something more encouraging than that about us. And they outright say, these guys look like they know what they're doing. So talk to them. And so then they would like reconnect at the end of the sales cycle and they would be the ones signing the dotted line. But the initiation came from them. And meanwhile, my content and our company's content is targeting the commercial directors, the heads of marketing, heads of sales, especially the heads of marketing. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense. I mean, if the top of funnel baits and hooks are working so well with founders and CEOs, then we ought to be concentrating and focusing on them and not the quote unquote champions who are going to champion our solutions. Because in the markets that we shoot for, and this is where the 200 number is coming from that you asked about. So in our market, in B2B software development, agencies, data companies, SaaS companies, this has been my experience that up to 150, maybe 200 people, the owner is like really involved. When you go above that, then you're entering what is the classical enterprise land when it comes to sales processes. So then you have really big buying teams, more formal decision-making structure or processes, and internal regulations and whatnot. So the classical enterprise sales books do really well there, but below the 150, 200-ish level, and again, this is going to be different for every industry or every vertical. This has been my experience that, okay, just go straight to the head.
Yeah.
straight to the head with your content. You still have to cater for everybody else that's going to be involved in the decision-making process, but you want to be seen and discovered by the heads of these people. And also another thing that you can look at is when you're selling to companies, when you're selling to departments, but these departments are just a handful of people, then it's highly likely that a person leading a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-person team, be it operations, HR, business development, you name it, they're probably not going to have budget authority and the type of authority that you're assuming that.
Yeah.
Okay, and so
I-
how else could I have figured this out and learned it easier and faster? Well, if our buyer discovery process had been stronger and more thorough. Because what we do all the time is we talk to, whenever we start to work with clients, we would interview some of their ideal customers, some of their best clients who we want to get more of. And one of the things that we're looking for in these interviews, in these buyer interviews, is to uncover their buying journey. And very often, if you're not skilled at interviewing, you will get some sort of generic schematic answer. That's the formal process that they think that they do. So they will tell you, oh, we get together. This is how we bought the solution. Well, Johnny, the analyst, told us that we needed a solution. And then we all got together and then we did some research and then we, boiled things down to 3 options. And then we passed it on to the leader, and then the leader made the decision, and that's what you'll get a lot of the time. And if you don't dig deeper than that with questions such as, okay, what exactly was happening when the need came up, and what other priorities were on the table the last time you bought something like that? What priorities did this beat out? What initiatives did buying this solution beat out? Questions like that. If you dig deeper, then you'll get to the meat of it. And sometimes it will just, you'll surface things like, actually, the CEO went to a conference and then they talked to someone and, and then they started a conversation and then they told Johnny to go look for a solution. And then the CEO already had 2 or 3 brands in mind. And the winner ended up being one of those. So it's going to be a vastly different process than what they will tell you out of the gate. Okay. This doesn't happen all the time, but if you dig deep enough, you'll almost always get them to sort of flip the script and tell you what was really going on.
Yeah, this is great, Dan. There's so much to unpack here. So much to unpack. Let's hit the pause button. Let me rewind a little bit and just first of all, thank you for confessing that you learned this lesson the hard way. You learned it yourself. You're very candid.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. This is a safe space, Dan. So like I tell people, BD is a team sport. We learn from each other, right? And this is one of the ways that we're learning from you, Dan. So I appreciate you starting off the story from that perspective.
I learned the most from people admitting their mistakes and how they screwed up and how they fixed it. And I'm assuming that when I tell you how I screwed up and how I fixed it and how I could have done it better, then that's going to be a valuable lesson coming across. So.
That's right, kids listening. Do not do this at home. Do not do what Dan did. Okay.
Yeah.
And hey, look, this is what one of the best and brightest. I mean, so again, too, sometimes a big part is just learning from those failures that you have in business development and just replaying and going through it. You look at the game tape, right? After the Sunday game. That's what Dan did. He went back and he picked it apart and he's like, where did the wheels fall off the bus? Because it wasn't apparent to him at the time. And so often in business development, we bid, we submit proposals, and we fail, and we just move on to the next one. And but what ends up happening is you just continue to repeat these failures without doing the detailed after action review to understand, okay, where did things fall apart and at what point in the process? And that's critical. You have to do that. You just can't, just wait for the win and have a win party and enjoy yourselves. This is how the team gets better. So Dan, thank you. First of all, thank you for sharing that high level lesson with everyone. And now let me dig a little bit deeper, because what the realization that you had was, you know, you have to have an ideal customer profile, but so often business developers, they focus on the company as the ideal customer profile. And what you said in the post, and you talked about it here as well, is you have to really break it down beyond the company level, and you have to understand the buyer personas, the roles of the people that take part in the buying process. And you really have to understand them in the small, medium-sized business. The other thing too you talked about was breaking down the numbers, right? And folks, you can do this at home. This is Dan's homework to you, so you can figure it out for yourselves. He says, look, step one, go back, review the past 1 to 2 years of closed won deals. Okay. The second step is create 2 segments based on who was the first identifiable touch. Was it the CEO, founder, the top dog, or was it a VP, manager, director, or anyone else? Okay, so you're going to, step one, look at the past 2 years of your closed won deals. Step two, okay, who was your first identifiable touch? Third and final step is for those 2 segments, all right, whether it's the top dog or the underlings, for these 2 segments, get this data. You want to find out the number of closed deals, what the ACV was for each one of those deals, right? The annual contract value for those deals. Then you want to know what the win rate was for those deals, the retention and lifetime value of those deals, right? And when Dan did this for his shop at Clear B2B, it was the biggest light bulb moment for him. When you gauge those SMB, 20 to 300 person company prospects, the numbers for him shows that the number of closed deals for the first touch being the CEO versus first touch being a manager, the number of closed deals, 82% of those deals were won when the first touch was the CEO. Okay. ACV, there was no real difference. The win rate, this is a growth. The win rate when it was CEO first touch was 52%. All right. And the retention lifetime value was 124% longer for those where CEO was first touch. So the numbers speak for themselves. Dan, as we start to move into the last 8 or so minutes of the show, when let's assume somebody does their homework, they come to the realization that, okay, it is CEO that really moves the needle, right? Your close one's going to be higher, your P wins higher when you're engaging CEO. Now that may
your
not be the
retention is
case.
going to be better.
Yeah, and your retention's going to be better. Yeah, your retention's going to be better once they look at those numbers and they prove it to themselves. And they prove it to their teams too, right? Because sometimes there's convincing other people on the team, because some people are just in the mode of, well, no, I've read it in a book and I'm just going to do what the book told me and I'm just going to engage the managers. But once you prove it to your team that, the numbers speak for themselves, we have to engage at the CEO level. People often reply back, "Oh boy, CEO, they're tough to get a hold of." They're chief, and to your point, these folks are chief cook and bottle washer. They have their hands on all the controls still, even up to a 200 person company. What have you found? What if you're going to reply to somebody that says, CEO is so hard to get a hold of, it's easier just to get in there and talk to a champion or a manager or something like that. What do you say really resonates? What's been the most effective entry point into engaging CEOs first touch? What's worked for you?
Well, since we're much better with content and authority building motions, and outbound hasn't really been a strong side to how we build business and to our services, we've really found that to work. So once you really understand your buyer, and this whole thing can be summarized with just one sentence: construct your go-to-market motion the way your buyers actually buy. And that encapsulates everything. Of course, it's very general and broad like that, but if you think about it, what I said about the buyer interviews, just discover, uncover, go deep on how they buy and adjust to that. And then you're going to get there.
Yeah.
But back to your question. So how do you get a hold of CEOs? Well, we found that when you talk about the things that they that keeps them up at night related to your solution, then that's like, we haven't found anything better than that. If you can get into communities where other CEOs are present and where they hang out and where they talk about their things, yes. If you can piggyback other influencers or other points of contact whom they follow and they trust, and enter cooperations, collaborations, and whatnot, then by piggybacking other people, you can get the attention of these CEOs and founders. And it just comes down to that. And LinkedIn is such a good ground, good territory for business developers to be doing that, because everybody's just a connection away.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
But back to your point. So if you've had success getting into companies via, lower by VPs or directors or managers, by all means do that. So you still want to do multi-threading. And if that's what works for your motion, hooray. Awesome. But, do the homework, do the analysis. And, many times the first point of contact is not going to come from the CEO. The CEO is going to issue a directive to, go check out this company, go check out that company. That's what's happened with us so many times. So I never spoke to the CEO until weeks into the process. But I know that the manager was instructed by the CEO.
Yeah.
So yeah, if I were doing outbound, I don't know, perhaps, the CEO is hard to get a hold of. And perhaps then it is more viable if you go through a manager or somebody who's lower down the food chain.
Yeah, I think the key takeaway there is do your homework. And if the homework plays out in the favor and it tells you the story that no, it's the mid-level folks that are effective, then great, do that. That's you're not saying just blindly follow your advice. You're saying do the homework, do the numbers, and follow where the numbers take you. And I think this is really critical for people to understand, because often we talk about marketing and sales alignment, and I always joke that that's not the problem. The problem is people are jumping over business development in the prospecting phase and trying to go right to sales. That's
Yeah.
that's your problem. And so the
Yeah.
alignment really is engagement between the business developers and the marketing team. And so business developers that are listening, this is where you play a vital role, right? And what Dan was saying is have those deep discussions, whether it's during the process or after you've won or after you've lost, and engage with those prospects and say, hey, why did you reach out to us? Was it because your CEO told you to research us? Was it because the CEO went to a conference and heard about us? Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because marketing often is not in a position where they're talking directly with the prospects. It's the business developers. So business developers, marketing craves that kind of feedback for, that you're getting right from the front lines. You're out there with your ear to the ground. You're talking to those prospects all the time. You have to give that data, that feedback to marketing. And that helps marketing not only understand how the numbers play out, but it also helps marketing create the right kind of content for influencing the members of that buying team. Whoever the first contact high probability of win is, that marketing then will start crafting a lot of that content that really speaks to that first touch high P win individual, right, Dan?
Exactly. Yeah. You brought up a couple of points there that are big rabbit holes in and of themselves, like 5 of them. And one that you touched on is, when we talk about creating content for a specific buyer persona, it's primarily the value proposition or the big problem that you're pushing. So it's, content works best when you're pressing pain triggers, like pain buttons. And it's going to be different. So your service or product is a given, like what it does and what it solves. But its big value and its big takeaway, its biggest. So the value proposition which you go to market with, it's going to be different based on which persona you're talking to. This is probably in your book, I think. And so let's say you're selling business development services. So when you're talking to the head of biz dev or the head of sales, you can come with stuff like team efficiency and I don't know, like numbers and whatnot. But when you're talking to the CEO of a 150-person company selling business development services, you're going to want to be mentioning different, outcomes, because if you mention stuff like, efficiency and saving time and stuff like that, they're going to be like, "Ooh, that's my manager's job. Don't talk to me about that." But if you talk about enterprise value, so meaning if with the solid business development processes that we help you develop, your company's going to be worth more. Um, you're going to have like a much better story to tell the board, and so these are much stronger value propositions in the eyes of a founder or a company leader than in the eyes of a department leader. So
Well,
that's the first thing you're going to want to think through.
well,
And
that
yeah, there's just so
and,
much more we could do on
oh,
this.
I tell you what, Dan, we're going to have you back to go down these rabbit holes together. I would love to have you back on the show because that sound you just heard was the light bulb going off in my brain. To have you back on the
Awesome.
show and really go into depth on these. I mean, folks, having discussions with your marketing team as a business developer is so critical. This is the type of discussion, just like Dan and I are having right now. Have these discussions with the marketing team. They need to hear these things. Okay. And it's a team effort. You go back and forth. Nobody necessarily has the right answers. And if you want the right answers, then you're going to follow Dan's post. And I'm going to have the link to Dan's post in the show notes. So you can go back and read it. It's great. If you want to find Dan on LinkedIn, it's Daniel Zsolt, Z-S-O-L-T, Rényi. Okay. R-E-N-Y-I. Of course, I'll have Dan's
Yeah.
profile
You
link
just put
in
Dan
the show.
Rényi in the search box. You're gonna find me. There's only one
Yeah.
of me. My mom said I'm special, and on LinkedIn I am. So there's only one of
Yes,
me.
you are special for us, Dan. And hey, folks, remember, it's a 3-step process. I love this tactic. Remember, step 1, go beyond just the company level when you're identifying and defining your ICP. Get to the buyer persona levels, okay? Get to those individual roles of the folks that are on the buying committee and the buying team. All right, step 2, do your homework. Look at those last 2 years of closed won deals, then split up that data to see, okay, first touch, was it CEO or was it somebody else? Was it one of the managers in the company? And then finally, step 3 is run all the numbers. Look at the closed deals, look at the ACV, look at the win rate, look at the retention lifetime value. And then finally, step 3 of all of this is have those candid discussions with your prospects, even when you're in the prospecting flow, is say, "Hey, how did you hear about us? Why did you come to us? Why did you pick up the phone? What's resonating in the content that I'm sharing with you? Please let me know that information, regardless of whether or not you become a client. Please share that with me. It's really vital information for us. It helps improve things for other prospects and clients in the future. And I bet you'll find a lot of people will love to share their perspectives with you. And that is gold that you can take back to the marketing folks. And together you can work through those winning messages, that winning content that will continue to increase your P-win on future deals. Dan Rényi, how can folks get a hold of you? What's it about LinkedIn, the best way, Dan, or what? How can
Yeah,
folks
go to
work with you
LinkedIn
in
or
Clear?
our company website, which is clearb2b.com, and you'll find the contact menu item there, and there's a form. So either through that or just hit me up on LinkedIn, and it's probably the best way to do that. Tony, this was great. I'm so glad that you brought up this topic, as I said in the beginning. So this is near and dear to my heart. It's been a big light bulb moment for me, like one of the big light bulb moments of the past 6 months for me. And I'm just so glad that you helped me spread the word.
Yeah, well, Dan, I'm happy to spread the word anytime I can about Clear B2B, folks. That's spelled Klear, B2B, Bravo to Bravo. And reach out to Dan. He's very accessible. He's a wonderful source of knowledge, posting almost every day on LinkedIn. Follow him, engage with his content. You'll find that he's a very generous source of information. Dan Rényi, thank you for being our first lab rat and joining us in the Business Development Laboratory.
Awesome. Good luck with this show, Tony. I'm excited to see where you take it. And thank you for having me. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Dan. We look forward to having you back sometime soon.
Thank you for listening to the Business Development Podcast. Join our free community of corporate partners and business development professionals advancing the art, science, and ethics of the business development profession at gbdassociation.org.